Emily Carter heard the words before she even stepped fully inside the house. Light laughter floating from the living room, casual and sharp at the same time. "You dress like trash," one voice said, followed by another quiet chuckle. And even though it sounded like a joke, it landed heavy in the air, making her pause at the doorway with her hand still on the handle of her worn suitcase. She had imagined this moment differently during the long drive to Seattle, thinking about fresh beginnings and second chances, telling herself that moving in with her father and his new family could finally give her a place where she belonged. But standing there now, she felt like she had walked into something already decided without her. The house itself was beautiful, too perfect almost, with clean white walls, soft lighting, and a calmness that didn't match the tight feeling growing in her chest. And for a second she wondered if she had made a mistake coming here at all. But then her father appeared, smiling wide and pulling her into a quick hug. His voice warm but distracted as he welcomed her in, already talking about how great everything would be now that they were all together. Behind him stood Linda Hayes, her stepmother, calm and graceful, with a soft smile that didn't quite reach her eyes but still felt kinder than the laughter Emily had heard, and she stepped forward, touching Emily's arm gently as she said she must be tired and that they were happy to have her, and Emily nodded, forcing a small smile because she didn't know what else to do. Then she saw them clearly for the first time, Chloe and Madison, standing side by side like they belonged in a magazine, their clothes neat and stylish, their posture confident, their expressions curious but distant, and as their eyes moved over Emily's oversized sweater and faded jeans, there was a silent judgment that said everything without another word. Emily looked away first, suddenly aware of every detail about herself, the way her sleeves were slightly too long, the way her shoes were worn at the edges. Things she had never thought twice about before, but now felt impossible to ignore, and she followed her father upstairs as he showed her to her room, talking about small things that didn't matter while she tried to steady her thoughts and remind herself why she came. The room was neat and bright, with a large window that let in soft afternoon light, and for a moment it felt peaceful, like maybe this space could be hers. Like maybe she could start over here without carrying everything from before, and she set her bag down slowly, taking in the clean bed and empty closet that waited for her life to fill it. After her father left, promising they would all have dinner together later, Emily unpacked quietly, folding her clothes with care, placing each item in the drawers as if organizing them would somehow organize her feelings too, and she paused when she held her favorite sweater, the soft one that had been with her through so many lonely days, wondering if it really looked as bad as they thought, or if it just didn't fit into this house the way she didn't yet. Voices drifted from downstairs again, lighter now, and she couldn't tell if they were talking about her or had already forgotten she was there. And that uncertainty sat heavy in her chest, because it made her feel invisible and exposed at the same time. When dinner came, she joined them at the table, sitting carefully, listening more than speaking, answering questions with short, polite replies while Chloe and Madison talked easily about their friends, their plans, their lives that seemed so full and certain. And Emily tried to follow along, but felt like she was watching something she wasn't part of. A few glances came her way, quick and measuring, and though no one repeated the words from earlier, they lingered in her mind, echoing quietly, shaping the way she held herself, the way she spoke, the way she avoided drawing attention. After dinner, she helped clear the table without being asked, hoping small efforts might make a difference, and Linda thanked her with a soft nod that felt genuine, even if brief. And that small moment gave Emily a flicker of hope that not everything here would be difficult. Later that night, back in her room, she sat by the window, looking out at the quiet street, the unfamiliar houses lined neatly under the fading sky. And she let out a slow breath she didn't realize she had been holding, telling herself that first days were always hard, that people needed time, that she could adjust if she tried. And maybe they would too. She didn't know yet how things would unfold, didn't know how much those first words would shape the days to come. But as she lay down in the unfamiliar bed, pulling the blanket close, she made a quiet promise to herself that she would not let a few careless words define her, even if they stayed with her longer than she wanted. The next few days moved quickly, but for Emily Carter, each moment carried a quiet weight that never fully lifted. Because while nothing openly harsh was said, the small comments and looks began to build into something harder to ignore. Something that stayed with her even when she was alone. Every morning started the same, with Chloe and Madison already dressed perfectly before school. Moving through the house with ease, while Emily stood in her room choosing between the same few outfits she had brought, suddenly unsure of every choice she made. And when she finally walked into the kitchen, she could feel their eyes on her, not always speaking but noticing everything. One morning, as Emily poured herself a glass of juice, Madison glanced at her reflection in the kitchen window and said in a calm voice that almost sounded helpful, "You know." It wouldn't take much to look more put together, and Chloe gave a small smile as she added, "Or maybe she just likes being comfortable." The way she said comfortable making it sound like something less than acceptable, and Emily nodded slightly, pretending not to mind, though her grip tightened around the glass for a second before she set it down. At school, things were easier because no one knew her well enough to judge her past or compare her to someone else, and she found comfort in her classes, focusing on her work, answering questions when she could, and slowly building a routine that gave her a sense of control. But the thought of going home always returned by the end of the day, bringing that same quiet tension back with it. In the afternoons, Chloe and Madison would often sit together in the living room, scrolling through their phones or talking about plans, and Emily would pass by, sometimes catching pieces of their conversations, small remarks about trends or styles, comments that seemed general but always felt aimed, and though they never directly told her to change. The message was clear in the way they spoke and the way they looked at her, like she was a detail that didn't quite fit into the picture of their lives. Emily tried to stay out of the way, spending more time in her room, reading or organizing her things, telling herself that keeping quiet was easier than responding. But even in that space, she couldn't fully escape the feeling that she was being measured against something she didn't understand. One afternoon, as she sat on her bed folding laundry, she picked up her favorite sweater, the one that had always made her feel safe, and held it for a moment longer than usual, her thoughts drifting as she wondered if it really looked as out of place as they seemed to think. And just then, there was a soft knock at her door before Linda stepped in, her presence calm and steady as she looked around the room before sitting beside Emily, without saying anything at first. Emily straightened slightly, unsure if she had done something wrong, but Linda's expression was gentle as she glanced at the sweater in Emily's hands and said quietly, "They can be a bit particular about things," her tone careful, not defensive but not dismissive either, and Emily gave a small shrug, forcing a light response as she said, "It's okay. I'm used to it," though the words didn't feel true even as she said them. Linda studied her for a moment, noticing the way her smile didn't quite match her eyes, and there was a pause where it seemed like she might say more, but instead, she reached out and adjusted the sleeve of Emily's sweater slightly, a simple gesture that carried more understanding than words, and said softly, "You don't have to be," and for a second, Emily didn't know how to respond because no one had ever said that to her before. No one had suggested that maybe she didn't have to just accept things the way they were. That moment stayed with her even after Linda left the room, leaving behind a quiet sense of comfort that Emily wasn't used to feeling in this house, and though it didn't change everything instantly, it gave her something small to hold on to, something that made the space feel a little less distant. Downstairs, Chloe and Madison continued their usual routines, their voices drifting up through the house as they talked and laughed, unaware or maybe unconcerned about how their words carried. And later that evening, as they sat together in the living room, Chloe mentioned casually that Emily's clothes looked like they belonged in another time, and Madison responded with a thoughtful hum. Not quite agreeing, not quite disagreeing, but the conversation turned into a quiet discussion about how easy it would be to fix that, to help her improve. The way they said help making it sound like a plan, rather than a suggestion. Emily, unaware of what they were thinking, sat upstairs with her book open but unread, her mind replaying Linda's words again and again, wondering if things could actually be different. If she could find a place here without having to change who she was. And for the first time since arriving, there was a small sense of hope growing inside her, fragile but real. She didn't notice the shift happening around her, The way small ideas were turning into decisions. The way quiet conversations downstairs were leading towards something she wasn't prepared for. And as the night settled in and the house grew calm, Emily allowed herself to relax just a little, believing that maybe the hardest part was already behind her. Not knowing that the next moment would test that belief in ways she hadn't expected, Saturday felt calm from the start. And Emily Carter held onto that feeling as she walked home from the library with a small stack of books in her arms. Her mind clear for the first time in days, because being away from the house gave her space to breathe and think without worrying about how she looked or what someone might say. And as she reached the front door, she even allowed herself a quiet hope that maybe things inside had settled too, that the tension she had been feeling all week had softened in some way. She stepped inside and noticed the house was unusually quiet. No voices, no music, just a stillness that made her pause for a second before she headed upstairs. Her footsteps light as she walked toward her room, expecting nothing more than the same space she had carefully kept to herself. But the moment she pushed the door open, that calm feeling broke instantly. Her clothes were no longer where she had left them, the drawers slightly open, the bed no longer neat, and several of her things spread out in a way that didn't feel accidental. And for a second, she just stood there, trying to understand what she was seeing before her eyes moved to the closet where Chloe and Madison stood, holding pieces of her wardrobe with expressions that mixed curiosity and quiet judgment. Chloe lifted one of Emily's sweaters, the soft one she always wore, and looked at it like it was something unfamiliar, tilting her head slightly as she said, "You still wear this?" Her voice not loud but clear enough to fill the room, and Madison, standing beside her, added in a calmer tone, "It's not really a style people wear anymore," not harsh. Not loud, but enough to make Emily's chest tighten as she stepped forward quickly, setting her books down without thinking. "Please don't go through my things," Emily said, her voice steady but softer than she wanted it to be, and for a moment neither Chloe nor Madison responded, their eyes shifting toward her as if they hadn't expected her to speak up at all, and Chloe lowered the sweater slightly, her expression changing just enough to show she was thinking about what to say next. "We were just trying to help," she replied, not defensive but certain, as if what they were doing made sense to her, and Madison nodded lightly, adding, "You could look really good if you tried something different," her tone more thoughtful than before, like she believed what she was saying could actually make a difference. Emily felt her hands tremble slightly at her sides, not out of anger but from the pressure of the moment. The mix of embarrassment and frustration building inside her as she looked around at her scattered belongings, each item suddenly feeling more personal than it ever had before. And she took a small breath before speaking again, this time more clearly, "I didn't ask for help," and the room went quiet after that, the kind of silence that makes every second feel longer. Just then, footsteps approached from the hallway, and Linda appeared in the doorway, her presence immediately shifting the energy in the room as she looked from Emily to Chloe and Madison, taking in the scene without rushing to speak, and for a brief moment, no one moved, as if they were all waiting for something to be decided. Emily's eyes met Linda's, and there was a mix of uncertainty and quiet hope there, not knowing what would happen next but needing something to change, and Chloe straightened slightly, holding the sweater more carefully now, while Madison stepped back just a little, her expression less certain than before. Linda walked into the room slowly, her gaze steady as she looked at the clothes, then at her daughters, and finally at Emily, and instead of raising her voice or asking questions right away, she stepped closer to Emily and gently placed a hand on her shoulder, a simple gesture that carried more meaning than any immediate reaction. Emily didn't expect what came next, because instead of stepping between them or turning the moment into something louder, Linda quietly pulled Emily into a brief, steady hug, not tight, not dramatic. Just enough to make her feel supported in a way she hadn't felt since arriving. And in that moment, Emily's tension softened just slightly, her shoulders relaxing as she stood there, surprised but comforted. "That's enough," Linda said calmly, her voice not harsh but firm in a way that didn't leave room for argument, and Chloe lowered the sweater completely this time, her expression shifting into something more thoughtful, while Madison looked down for a moment, as if reconsidering everything that had just happened. Linda didn't continue with a long speech or explanation. She simply looked at her daughters and added, She doesn't need to change to belong here, her tone clear and steady. And those words seemed to settle into the room, changing the atmosphere in a quiet but lasting way. Emily stepped back slowly, still processing everything, her eyes moving between Linda and the others, unsure what to say but feeling something inside her shift, something stronger than before. Not confidence yet, but the beginning of it, and Chloe finally placed the sweater back on the bed, smoothing it out slightly as if trying to undo part of what had happened. While Madison gave a small nod, not fully meeting Emily's eyes but no longer distant in the same way. The room grew quiet again, but this time it felt different, less tense, more uncertain in a way that suggested things were changing, even if no one fully understood how yet. And as Emily looked around at her things, she no longer saw them the same way she had minutes ago, because now they felt defended, protected, and for the first time since she arrived. She didn't feel completely alone in that space, even though she knew this moment wasn't the end of everything. Just the start of something new that none of them had expected. The house didn't change overnight, but something quiet and important had shifted after that afternoon. And Emily Carter could feel it in the way the air moved through the rooms, softer now, less heavy. As if the tension that once followed her had loosened its hold, just enough for her to breathe without thinking twice. The next morning she woke up earlier than usual, sunlight slipping through her window, and for a moment she stayed still, listening to the quiet, expecting the same unease she had grown used to. But it didn't come the same way, and that alone felt new. She got ready slowly, choosing her clothes without rushing, picking up her favorite sweater without hesitation this time, not because she was trying to prove anything, but because it felt like hers. And when she looked at herself in the mirror, she didn't immediately search for flaws the way she had before, instead noticing something steadier in her expression. Something that hadn't been there when she first arrived. Downstairs, the kitchen was already active, Chloe scrolling through her phone while Madison poured coffee, and for a brief second Emily wondered if things would go back to how they were. But when Chloe glanced up, her expression didn't carry the same sharp edge, and she simply gave a small nod before returning to what she was doing. While Madison looked at Emily a moment longer and said a quiet morning, simple and neutral, but enough to feel like a step forward. Emily responded just as calmly, not overthinking it, not shrinking away, and as she moved through the kitchen, she noticed how the silence between them no longer felt like judgment but something unfinished, something that could still change. Days passed, and while Chloe and Madison didn't suddenly become warm or close, they stopped making those small cutting remarks, their attention shifting back to their own lives, leaving Emily space to exist without feeling watched every second. And in that space, she began to settle into her routine more naturally, focusing on school, spending time reading. Even sitting in the living room occasionally, without feeling like she had to disappear the moment they walked in. Linda remained steady through it all, not overly involved but present in a way that mattered, checking in with Emily in small ways, asking about her day, making sure she felt included without forcing anything, and those quiet efforts built a sense of trust that Emily hadn't expected to find here. One evening, as the sun set outside, Emily stood in her room again, looking at her reflection, the same place where she had once questioned everything about herself. And she noticed how different the moment felt now, not because her life had become perfect, but because her perspective had shifted. And she picked up the same sweater that had once been held up for judgment, and put it on without a second thought, smoothing the sleeves as she looked at herself with a calm that came from understanding rather than doubt. Later that night, she walked into the kitchen where Linda was standing by the counter, organizing a few things, and for a moment Emily hesitated, unsure how to say what she felt. But then she stepped forward and said quietly, "Thank you," her voice steady, carrying more meaning than the single phrase could fully express. Linda looked up, her expression softening slightly as she met Emily's eyes, and she nodded once, not making it a big moment, just saying, "You're allowed to be yourself here," in a tone that was simple but certain, and Emily felt those words settle in a way that stayed with her long after the conversation ended. Over time, the house began to feel less like a place she had to adjust to, and more like somewhere she could exist without constantly measuring herself against others, and even Chloe and Madison, though still distant at times, showed small changes in their behavior, less focused on comparison, more aware of the space they shared. And while they didn't say much about what had happened, their actions made it clear that something had shifted for them too. Emily didn't try to change who she was to fit into their world, and she didn't expect them to become something they weren't either, but she found a balance in the middle. A quiet understanding that not every connection had to be perfect to be real. One afternoon, as they all sat in the living room, each doing their own thing, the silence felt comfortable rather than tense. And Emily realized that this was what she had been hoping for from the start, not perfection, not instant closeness, but a place where she didn't feel out of place just for being herself. She leaned back slightly, her book open in her hands, her sweater soft against her arms, and for the first time since she arrived, she didn't feel like she had to prove anything to anyone. And that sense of ease, simple and quiet, was enough to make everything else feel possible.